And I'm gonna start by thanking I'm a member of VII Photo. I'm a super grateful and proud participant in the many things that Seven Foundation is doing in the world these days, with support for photographers, with emphasizing diversity and reaching so many parts of the globe. It's a real honor to be under the wing of such a really great organization. And at the same time, I just want to say thanks to Photo Wings, which is a partner in these Seven Insider conversations. So we're going to get going. And I'm Sara Terry. I'm a photographer. I'm the founder and director of the Aftermath Project. And on my screen, no, wait, that way, I can never do this on Zoom, is Raymond Thompson. He is the winner of the 2023 1492-1619 American Aftermaths Grant. Raymond, say hi. Raymond's in Austin, Texas.
Hello. Raymond Thompson Jr. I'm currently based in Austin, Texas, and yes, I was the winner of last year's American Aftermaths Grant. I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you. So we're doing something we've never done before. Some of you may have followed it. I did 2 weeks of office hours with the Aftermath Project, where I just had a Zoom room open for people who had questions, and a couple of special Zoom calls with people. But this is something we've never done before, in talking with one of our grant winners about how he, in this case, he created his proposal, his project, I'll tell you that in 2022, Raymond caught the attention of the judges. We were really interested in what he was doing. And I often say, for those of you who followed the conversations, that the process of judging is we go through several rounds, and the last round is always about 10 to 15 photographers who we are taking every word of their statement, thinking it through. We're looking at their photos. We're balancing the grant winner and the finalists so that there's a very diverse way of considering aftermaths. And when you're in that last group, I reach out, I hope I did to you, Raymond, or try to write an email in that group to say, you made it this far, please apply again. So I'm going to ask Raymond to start with what he was thinking about in 2022, and just telling you a little bit more about his project to begin with. So Raymond, how did you hear about the program? What was different about writing your proposal? You just jump in and I'll ask questions.
Well, I mean, I've known about Aftermath's traditional grant for a long time. I think it probably even applied years and years ago. I think for a period of time when I was definitely doing more like straight photojournalism, I was really interested in covering the war on drugs. And I was trying to squeeze that into even that traditional grant cycle, realizing that probably wasn't the best fit for that type of grant from this point of view. But I was trying to make that happen because that was the project that I was like working on. But that was like probably like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. It was a while. And then I heard about the grant. I didn't apply the year that Chris Graves won, but I heard that I realized that there was a grant when I saw that Chris Graves had won for his project that he did. And
he was our first year grant winner in this cycle. Go ahead.
So that was when I really just there's this cool grant. It really is right up the alley of the kind of work I think of throwing areas that I'm interested in and covering with my work, and I wanted to remind myself to apply in the next year. But I'll share screen and show y'all some of how I did that.
And give us first, Raymond, just like a brief explanation of the project, which is so
Yeah,
fascinating.
so basically the 2022 was called American Maroonscapes, and I was really, really interested in this idea of the maroon. And just in case y'all don't know, like maroons essentially are like folks who would have been enslaved people who would have escaped and sort of moved into the spaces in between plantations to exist and live their lives. And I was super interested in this idea of the maroon and how they existed in the landscape. Um, and in 2022, I was trying to figure out how does that fit into this grant? And I thought, like, I was thinking, well, maybe if I sort of like do a bunch of research and I'll figure out how to talk about maroons connection to slavery, like why they went into slavery, but also wanted them to connect that to like the contemporary landscape of now. So I began to think about uh, uh, people who were like going back to the land to essentially to homestead and how that could relate, right? I had this very elaborate idea for this project in theory, which sort of I'm jumping right into the sausage making and like showing you all my notebooks, which I never do, but I have these notebooks in which I basically like was trying to connect this idea of maroonage in the landscape and how it was connected to like contemporary homesteading or other people who had used the land. And all this is coming back to like my main core interest as a photographer is to do these images that look at the African American experience of the American landscape. This is a
I'm going to stop
big,
you for one
yeah.
second, Raymond, because I want to let people know what you're seeing in Raymond here. The American Aftermaths grant, we know it's kind of a tricky grant. We are asking you to think hard and to dig deep into the layers of history when you look at this. And it's not like photojournalism, right? Where or even social justice grants, even like if you're applying for the Gene Smith, where you're working on a passion project, or like I just won a grant from the Magnum Foundation for something on strong unions and labor organizing, and I wrote that in a very contextual way about what's happening right now and connecting it to the past. So I guess it wasn't typical photojournalism, but this grant asks you to engage in a way that most other things don't. And I'm just going to put in here, so what you're seeing, this really fascinating thing that's emerging from Raymond, and what really grabbed the judges was looking at the landscape as a way of understanding, the aftermath of enslavement and representation of Blacks in the landscape. It's a super thoughtful approach, and Raymond's going to continue, but I want to tell you too, one of the things we're encouraging people, and our many phone calls have been, the aftermath of enslavement and colonialism is broad. There are Asian stories, like our first year finalist who talked about the Chinese immigrants who worked on the Trans-American Railroad and were paid nothing, and the prejudices they endured. That's an aftermath of enslavement and colonialism. And I've been telling everybody this year, there was a really, and it's in the call letter somewhere, I think, there was an amazing opinion piece in the New York Times from a woman, I can't remember her name, but she wrote about the fact that the fires in Maui were an aftermath of the colonial practices that changed the traditional agricultural practices of Hawaii, and that those wildfires were a disaster just waiting to happen. That's an aftermath of colonialism. So I'm just encouraging and telling you how welcoming we are to projects like Raymond's, that's really kind of looking at a different way of understanding this aftermath experience, and also broadening it out and kind of going, come on, think with us, let's stretch these boundaries. So Raymond, sorry I jumped in and interrupted you, but that was like you just
I was just
you're
talking about all this like this sketch here,
yeah.
and this is important. It's not what the story turned out to be, but it became like the intellectual primer of how I want to approach this story. And then I kind of had to back up a little bit, like just to think about like who I like my background is like a combination of journalism, fine art, and American studies. So all those things overlap into how I like to approach storytelling. So hence I'm like really big into reading theory about things that helps me understand other ways I could potentially look at doing a story like this. Um, and
Where do
since
you
like
read theory, Raymond? Where do you get ideas like that?
well, most of it, I mean, like a lot of this came from like books about surveillance and surveillance. This idea of people like constantly throughout history, we see um, African Americans specifically being looked at through the archive in different ways, through slave ads to all kinds of things, newspapers. Like there's this active stay in your place. We see you. We see what you're
Okay,
doing. And I became
interesting.
super fascinated by this other term that I forgot who coined called surveillance, which is the act of not being seen or act of bouncing off against that surveillance. And
Okay,
those two interacting ideas are super interesting to me. And I really found the Maroons overall were doing or actively doing that. But of course, we don't have any evidence really. We have these through all these threads, and we have to like pull those threads to sort of even touch the story.
okay,
And that became super important. But the big problem, like for me in the first structure of my essay, is when I wrote that proposal, it was really like I can look through how like I just went through it so I didn't make y'all read the whole thing and quickly broke down what was in it. The 2022 proposal. The first part was like I spent like the first paragraph briefly connecting, trying to connect homesteading, contemporary homesteading with the 1619 theme. Then I spent the like two-thirds of the rest body of this of my proposal talking like connecting those roots to make it make sense. So American capitalism roots in slavery, the role of the Virginia slave codes and all that, the role of surveillance in slavery, and then anti-surveillance practices of enslaved people. Finally thinking of like what I was going to do. And then like always sort of I went and I decided to do some research to find some folks I could work with. Like so I found some local Black homesteaders in North Carolina that I could go and potentially like start this story with. And then I also listed a couple other former homesteading sites throughout the United States that could possibly go to engage with that landscape in those spaces. And like for me, this is like a very broad proposal. And it was like probably too loose. The second part of that too was what I submitted picture wise, and I'll probably get more into this. Maybe we'll talk about it more later. But I in that application, my photos were like I think I submitted. Let's don't get me wrong, 30 pictures, right? 30 images.
yeah,
You can turn.
yep, yep.
So there's 30 images, and I did 10 images each of three different projects. Is what I did. And in doing that,
So
like I was
just to
trying to.
clarify, in your submission of photos,
Mhm,
it was three different bodies of work, which is okay if
mhm.
you're going to do that in your application, and it was 10 for each of those three bodies of work. I'm going to be curious to
Mhm.
hear how we talk about your next application, but how did you choose the three bodies of work that you wanted to share?
Basically, in my mind, I was trying to show that I was working in this space, and I chose work from I believe it was I have this project that is just portraiture of African Americans in the wilderness, which is represented by the image in the top right, in
Hmm.
which basically I was trying to connect, like Black folks and their experiences to the woods in the United States, thinking about the idea of the tree as a symbol in Black life, which can be
Hmm.
one level be peaceful and one level could represent lynching, and then using the aesthetics of lynching to like
Yeah.
how I make the photographs. Like so, I use these black and white high key contrast images, images that I was sampled off of from the lynching archive of images that are out there. So that was
And
like the first.
I'm going to stop you again to say this was, it
Mhm.
caught the judge's attention. We were interested in this. We were interested in Raymond's ability to translate this idea of posing blacks in nature under a tree, and also being able to reference lynching. So he was writing and photographing in a way that we were like, wow, this guy's got a lot going on. Okay, keep going.
The second project would have been my Appalachian Ghost project, which is about the Hawkson's Tunnel disaster in West Virginia, which happened in the 1930s in the past. And essentially, I wanted to do a project about this story, which there's almost nothing left in the landscape to photograph. There's a few things. There are a lot of archives available, and I ended up using archival materials and like two different ways or three different ways. One, I would either use the archive as inspiration for making a set of pictures based on the archive, sort of represented by that image on the on my left hand side of the guy with the tubes around his neck.
Yeah.
That came from looking at a picture out of one of the archival images that I found. I would then physically take archival images and actually cut out the figures from these images. And the people were really, really, really small in these really huge images, and I wanted to sort of make them people. Or I would mess with the archive in other ways. I would put text on top of things. I was trying to find all these strategies to sort of build out an archive that didn't exist, right? And primarily the Huxley's Tunnel thing was a thing that happened to mostly African Americans in the space, but we would never know from the history that and how it was collected. They were almost invisible from that story, and I was trying to bring them back into the story with these recreated or made images from there. But it also included landscape and more traditional photographs that I made, and like the final product is a combination of all those things. So I'm using like 4 or 5 different techniques to sort of get to that story or how to.
And we're happy with that, by the way, to see how people want to work with archival or landscape or everything you're talking about. It's like, oh, okay, you got some thinking going on there, and that's super important. So keep going.
And the final one, I think I submitted my tobacco leaves. I was in art school at the time, or just finishing art school, and I had made this series of chlorophyll prints using Dorothea Lange's and other FSA Farm Security Administration photographers using their archive.
Yep.
This came out of COVID too, because I couldn't. Like I wanted to start this project years and years ago, but I couldn't go to North Carolina because of COVID. So I began just to simply study the archive and what had been made. And then I combined those images onto tobacco leaves to a process called chlorophyll printing. So it's just like alternating the process. And again, for me, it was just trying to figure out another way to get at a story. I chose images all from North Carolina, all from the place I intended to be working. And this is me also exploring the visual archive that was there. So those are like the three, they're related projects, but they're all very different techniques.
I'm going to show you. And Raymond, I found, y'all, I was looking for this earlier and I couldn't put my hand on it. I found the photographs that you submitted from 2022. So let us just go check these out. And so you can see what Raymond submitted here. I'm just going to go through quickly because he's been talking about them. Tell us, this first body again is...
It's called Imaging Imagining, and it's again thinking about the African American experience in the landscape. I simply wanted to put
Go ahead.
For me, it was about like I always say when I Google Black people in trees, I get white people in trees. I get pictures of people recreating Black people in trees, images of lynching. So that inspired me to be like, okay, I wanted to investigate this,
and that got us. That got us. And this is from
Appalachian Ghosts.
Okay. So just so you can see, so essentially in this situation, Raymond was beginning to articulate, and he was working in this broad space, and we could see that he had strong concepts behind his work. We didn't feel that he had quite, I love these ones where you're printing on using these archival images in this way. And then I know you have one, I'm just running through them, everybody, not they're worth looking at, but just to sort of show you, if you're going to submit images from a previous body of work, here's how you get our attention. This was a super interesting way, again, of working with archival imagery. And he had an explanation for it in the work. And I'm wondering, I think that, Raymond, it tells me that's all. Yeah, that was all. You submitted those 2 bodies, not 3.
Yeah.
3
bodies,
3. Yeah, those 2. Yeah, sorry, those 2. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and you can go back to having your screen for a minute. But so people always ask, what if I haven't started my project yet? Can we submit photos? And with this project I just did that I got a grant from the Magnum Foundation, I hadn't begun the work yet, but I did have part of that process involves inviting my subjects to write on photographs. I had done that, and I had a really strong essay that I said, here's what the process is. So in here, and I didn't have pictures, that were made of labor unions at that point. So we can see Raymond thinking here, and working things through. And are you ready to like sort of tell us what happened? And put,
Yeah, so
y'all put questions in the Q&A if you've got them.
yeah. So from there, the very next proposal structure changed because what happened was I didn't get the grant, so began to do some of the work. I actually got to go and begin some of this project and begin to actually work out what I thought I could do. But first, just thinking about just how the proposal changed, right? I think I had a much stronger proposal the second time around because it was
Yes,
much
you
more
did.
focused. It was much more focused. And even you can even say like in the intro, I was like, what is this project? What are the goals of the project? What research is guiding my project compared to I spent that first connecting the Black homesteading with the 1619 theme, right? In the body, I defined what maroons were and maroonage. I defined the landscape that I was going to be working by geography. And then I provided specific projects, specific examples of what I thought what I really want to focus on in that area, specifically like actual down to individual characters that I wanted to look at. But then I also again connected the project back to the 1619 theme, right? Which is
So
very
super
different.
smart. Go
Yeah.
ahead. And very different from what you did. Go ahead.
Because the second time, I did the first time, I spent a lot of time on theory, and trying to work through the theory. Like this theory is still in the project; it's just infusing my ideas. But it wasn't. I kind of flipped it. I didn't use as much of
You
it.
did. And that's a super important thing. And it's also what we've been talking about in some of the other Zoom calls this fall. Don't, and you changed in that application. And by the way, folks, you can read pretty much the full body of Raymond's 2023 proposal on the website, theaftermathproject.org, because the applicant's project statement is essentially what you see on that website. And you've got a whole bunch of examples of great project statements, of winning project statements there. But we had a phone call with somebody who was wanting to know if his project was an American aftermath project. It was about imprisonment, and the Black population, which, hello, yes, that's an aftermath of enslavement story. But he spent about 5 minutes telling us the history of this. And, before he even told us what he was going to do. And this was in office hours. That's a fair game to do that there. And I think Chris Graves might have been on that call with me that day. And we were just like, stop with the history. For starters, you got to figure out your judges are going to be pretty smart people and know a lot of this. Tell us your project. Open up by saying you're going to do this family and that family. He wanted to look at this prison system through a very human narrative. And we're like, and then you can just add a little more history. But what Raymond did in his second proposal was he surprised us with this idea of maroons. I mean, I'm sure people who are better historians than I of, that particular phase of the Black experience in America would be more familiar with maroons, but the average person, not so much, I think. And so we were like, oh, well, that's an interesting space. And now he's talking about an issue, of landscape and representation. And he had we're going to show the photos that he submitted with his proposal, because he also included a few smart archival things that were just heartbreakingly beautiful. But I just want to say, Ted Ostrowski, I'm just going to answer your question. Is Aftermath only open to US photographers? The American Aftermaths grant is focused on the United States aftermaths of colonialism and enslavement, but those stories have connections in other places, including, especially, for example, West Africa, the borders with Mexico. So there are ways to do that. So it's not only open there. The traditional post-conflict grant is any worldwide conflict. Diana Apfelbacher is asking how long it took for you to fully conceptualize your ideas for the Aftermath grant. How would you answer that? We're getting a glimpse, but I'm curious how long it was.
I probably have been interested in like Black folks in the landscape for probably 3 years.
Mhm.
And And you can really see that theory coming out in the first application. And clearly, I was in a space where I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do yet. I had interests or ideas I was trying to get to a specific landscape to do work.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what happens was so that 3 year period, and then I began to focus it, or I actually found a story in the landscape to do. But it
Yeah.
took 3 years of thinking, reading to get to a space where I was actually ready to do the work.
Okay. That makes sense. And I have Ruben, are you understanding correctly that the two proposals Raymond sent are for the same project, but different statements? I think
They're
you just kind
they
of
they're
answered that,
related.
right?
They're
Yeah.
related statements because basically one was I had the same interests. I was interested in maroonage. I was trying to figure out how to get a grant to help me do a project about maroons.
Yeah.
At first, I
Yeah.
really thought that maybe I had to keep it more focused to now, and the first proposal was trying to connect 1619 specifically to people in the landscape now that I could document.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the approach. But the second time around, I just said no. After I visited the landscape and I was touched by being in that space, I
Yes.
completely changed my approach because I got to go there and it kind of changed um, a lot
There's
of
a lot
things.
to be said for that because you began to feel, I think that this type of work requires an emotional connection as well as an intellectual connection. And I think without having, I couldn't have put my finger on this before, but I think, Raymond, that what we felt in your next proposal was the emotional connection. It just all started coming together. Chad, by the way, thank you so much for putting the link in the chat box to Raymond's work on the website. I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, Raymond, can I put up are these, is this your proposal? Is this your 2023? You've got it
I
too?
think so. I think it
I've
is.
got it image by image. So let me, if you, let me, that's just
Okay, yeah, totally. You could do it image by image. We
let's
can
do
talk about it
this.
that way. Okay.
Yeah, because I want to bring into the conversation here, I'm going to share my screen. Hang on, folks. Um, one of the things we really wanted to talk about today is sequencing. Because I guarantee you that 94% of photographers don't know how to sequence their images for I want to go back don't do this, for a grant proposal quite often. And Raymond, by the way, was a judge on this year's 2023 traditional post-conflict grant. So he's seen both sides of it with us. And we say constantly, like, most photographers put their best image, they're like, they're like the thing that kind of takes our breath away. Quite often it shows up as image number 10 in a 30 image edit. And honestly, I don't know, I should ask somebody sometime what they're thinking, because it's almost like people are editing a magazine story or something, like, oh, here's the big landscape opening picture, the classic double truck where you can run a headline or whatever, and then you enter the story. When you're submitting a grant proposal, like for anything, you've got to, go pow, image number 1, and give it a pretty darn strong image number 2 and 3 if you've got it, and then build kind of your story within there, and you want to come back out to a strong place at the end. We always recommend, God, if you have a friend who knows how to help you sequence, do that. But there's so much, we fall in love with sequenced photos that have the kind of visual intelligence of showing how a hand gesture, from one photo goes into the next photo that might be a tree branch or something leaning in that direction. I'm just talking off the top of my head here. I think more people I should do a sequencing workshop, because there's so much beauty in it. And it's a form of understanding the power of your own images. This is the first image we saw in Raymond's work. And another tip for you on the Aftermath Project grant, both grant cycles, we look at your images first. We have a spreadsheet. Everybody, all the judges know it. We have my colleague Andy Cullen, who is the person who takes in the grant proposals and answers your questions. He knows immediately, like, here's what the the short summary of this project is. But we look at the images first and sort of go, I'm not sure if my light is affecting the screen on your end, but I'm going to turn it down here, and go, wow. And I got to tell you, we all looked at this photo. This is Raymond's first photo in his submission. Remember what his first photo was in 2022? And we know it's about maroons. You know, we have a little bit of understanding about landscape and surveillance and obscurity and representation. And we all just went, wow, like that's poetry. It's so deeply emotional. It's so strong. I haven't seen a lot of photographs like this. That's something else. If you want the photograph that people haven't seen before, that doesn't look like everybody else that stood in the same place or did the same story. And that's what the American Aftermath Grant calls out in people. And then we just moved in without knowing it. And Raymond, I'm gonna review these as a judge. And then if you want to
Yeah.
tell us your thinking as the applicant.
Yeah. I mean,
So let me get through it. No, I'm going to go through all
okay,
of them,
okay,
and then
okay, okay, go ahead.
I'm going to run you through them to talk about
Okay,
them. I'm
okay,
so
all right,
bossy.
okay.
But then to have this encounter with this so close-up portrait that looks like it's a contemporary one, but oh my God, it could be like historical. There is so much in this image. And then we got to the third one. And this is very relevant for Raymond's work. It's not going to work for every project, but this is an ad run by a plantation, an owner of enslaved people. This is the ad they've placed in a paper trying to find the human being that escaped captivity, and they're just reduced to these, you know, well set small eyes, nose turns a little upwards, and face of an acute sly appearance. These are devastatingly important to Raymond's project. And from this first one, you know, we just $20 reward, ran away from the subscriber. We were in at this point. And now he's beginning to explore in a more direct form, although still hidden. And I mean, all these ideas of surveillance and hiding and loss, and maroons who didn't want to be far from the plantations they escaped from because their families were still there and they were surviving. And so Raymond's imagining these places. And that's why your emotional connection came through so fully in this work. Here's another one, you know, so his research on this has yielded these texts that do matter to understanding this story. This one, we all just kind of, you know, it took our breath away. Again, so on this level of visual intelligence and visual literacy, escape, you know, flying away, caught, gone. It could be a million things, and Raymond may tell you it means something else, but it just kind of makes your heart go in your throat. And now we're back in that space, and we're observing something from far away. You know, you get that feeling of a maroon missing home, you know. And Raymond, you again, truly, you can tell me I'm nuts. Cotton, hello, cotton fields, you know, that's so amazing. Another one of those tight portraits. Is it somebody's meant to be that sense of a face in hiding, or a face that's being remembered? You know, these are working on so many levels. I mean, to me, the difference between Raymond's first year, when we were interested in his ideas, so maybe you're going to catch our attention with your ideas, but to then the execution of this, we remembered trees and Raymond's interest in trees, you know, from his first year, in a different context here though, right? Is this home? Is this protection now for a maroon? Again, these portraits are just, to me, astonishing. I haven't seen portraits like that, or certainly not many. And now we're moving into these more metaphorical images in the landscape. And then he's bringing us into possibly, I'm just going to, without having read a caption, like, oh, was this a town where the plantation owner, like where they lived and where they did business, you know? And so you go there, and oh, again, here's that face. These are such gorgeous things. One of these, I'll tell you, hands down, I wrote to Raymond about this. This is the $30 reward for Millie. And this sentence alone, I think I told you, Raymond, I thought this should be like the title of the project. Millie often wears roses in her hair. You know, that still undoes me, you know, as it's meant to be like a I don't know, just some factual or demeaning representation of a person. And to me, it screams her humanity and her love of beauty. And I think, did you do the, and there are the rose bushes, right? So Raymond, is this a super smart edit, you know? And again, in the town, I'm going to go a little quick, the statement again, these are this whole sense of place and who occupies it or doesn't occupy it, who is the authoritative figure in space and who has been marginalized but actually is a very powerful figure in that space. Again, obscuring direction, you know, it's all yeah. I'm just going to go through and Raymond, tell me if you think we understood, like, I just, again, all these issues of navigation and landscape and where am I and loss and trying to find your way. All these images speak to this. It's a super, super smart edit. That's the
Yeah.
end of it. Raymond, and so were we, am I close even in telling
You're
you what
very,
we
no,
think?
you're super close. I mean, of course, I had my like my guidance through how
Mm.
I said the images. I'm too close to them. It's like I knew. I
Yeah,
mean, my guidance through um, was to kind of create these sections of images that sort of work together
they do.
with
Yep.
these breaks. So either like an abstraction of a landscape to an abstract landscape of a face, because these faces are also landscapes in their own way.
Yes.
I mean, they're all people who are from the community where I was working,
Mhm.
sort of from that space. They represent the landscape of space. They're also, this is like personal stuff, but like I was looking for myself within these spaces too. Also, like I was looking for like a sense of kinship and familiarity
Yep.
to the faces
Yep.
as well, and so that's why I chose to photograph. And there's other more theoretical things that are interesting me about visibility and black skin and all that stuff, but just other things. If I think about often what guided me through this project was this idea of the portal and thinking about portals and thinking about the
Yep.
ways we move through spaces. So I often just went looking for what I thought was a portal.
Yes.
Um,
I
so
remember
it
that
could
in your writing. Yep.
yeah, so it could be as simple as like a circle in someone's eye. Like specifically, there's like if you flip forward to actually we can do let's just start with the like this picture, like that portal, that little glimmer of the that
Right here.
circle, then to the cotton field
Oops,
also
sorry.
has the circles. So
Yeah,
formerly
absolutely.
I was thinking about like those
But
little abstract forms that happen, and then if you go to the next image,
I just want
I
to
think
say super smart visual edit here. And I knew it when it passed on to somebody, but it's like there, that little one becomes a field, you know, of all those orbs. And you were going to say,
but that happened. I did that throughout. Like I would find, for instance, if you go to the one with that has the rain, that's been again, I did it again. Like went from like this flaring, like almost circly orb thing to another orb that was on the side of a building. Like all that stuff sort of played into like another thing of light. Like that was a hitting. So it was almost like you can go from this orb that looks like it's shooting off somewhere into where it hit. It's it's
and for
just
me as a color photographer to go and a
yeah,
red light. It's not a
yeah.
green light, it's a red light, you know, and you have a choice about how when you stand there and when you
I
photograph
do.
that red light.
I had both.
And
I
you
had
thought
both.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you thought both. So I just want to like stop here and say, so it doesn't, we then had your captions and we had your text, you know, so
Yeah.
you move forward immediately and with this one we knew it was going forward. As we looked at your photographs, we wanted to see more. We knew what the project was about and that you had applied before, so it was like, okay, that's going forward, and it kept going forward. And in that last round, and Andy Cullen is always there because as we're looking, Andy's reading. He knows this applications really well. He will read things to us that are relevant. And in that last round, every judge, we take a break from the screen and each other, and we read word for word all the applications. I mean, we've read them or gone through them briefly or the summaries. We know what you're doing as an applicant. But in this space, once your photos have moved you here, then your words become as important as your photographs. We really need to know that you get it. And I think one of you had that question about Raymond, and I'm going to stop for a second, Raymond, because there's a lot of questions I see.
Okay.
But we, I don't even know what I was going to say just then, but it's you can see this is a really wonderful opportunity for you guys to see what Raymond, had submitted with 1 year, and you've watched this person's thought process develop, and he's told you how it happened, and he went there. And to me, in your case, the having gone there part of it was just it for you, and not everybody has to do this, but for you it came on fire. I mean, what you've created here is just an incredible body of work. And I'm gonna stop sharing for a sec, and we can come back to that, Raymond, if you have more. But it also doesn't matter that you heard me read the images. That was a first read, and I knew more about some of them, but I was just telling you like how I remember the judges in the moment going through Raymond's pictures and what we were moved by. But then you heard how Raymond is also layering them so deeply. And that's what makes photographs. I mean, this is not a magazine assignment, right? This is a long-term project. That's what the grant is for, a long-term project. You do not have to finish the grant work in your grant year. We're supporting a production year for you of your imagery. I hope Raymond is still working on this. I don't know if you are. Are you? Yes.
I am. No, I am. I'm like thinking about how to grow it now, but yeah, I'm still working on it.
Yeah. And I would think that that's, like that's what we expect. But I'm just going to jump into the Q&A, the questions here, because I want to see what people are asking. Jordan, you've got 16 images. I'm aware of your project. You've been on one of the other calls. No, 16 is a fine amount. That's actually a good amount of work. And what we always say to people is what the judges are looking for is your understanding of visual narrative. Like, do not send us a portfolio of 30 single shot, images, unless you have a concept that's a street photography approach to a, something post-conflict. And even then you'd have to have an intelligence behind those images. But so 16, you can say these 16 are from the project, and we will know that in the judging. And then you can include the other 14 and just say, and this is a story I worked on that shows my similar interest in this subject, or that shows my similar interest in this way of working, or that's from project where I learned a lot. I mean, I'm just tossing out ideas for everybody. Megan Mosley says, beautiful and emotional work. Mando, I agree with you on that, Megan. Thank you. Santi Posa has a question for you. Raymond, did you have anybody interested publishing your work as you applied for the grant? I ask this because sometimes they require you to show somebody else would be engaged with your work in case you are shortlisted. I'm gonna answer it first with, we are so proud to have supported and discovered many, many photographers who are not yet published or even well-known in the photo world, which I'm not saying about Raymond, but we pride ourselves on that. Raymond, did you?
No. The work hadn't been published. I was actually in the stage where I was trying to make sure I wasn't crazy. Because I was, bringing these like I was trying to combine these like almost 4 different materials into a story. And I was like, does this make sense? Does this make sense? And asking that question a lot. So I was very much not in position ready to be published. And there was no one who was quite there, because I wasn't really ready yet either, because I was still trying to make sure that I wasn't crazy.
We hope, we love it when Chris Graves has published, a book from his work. And we have requirements as the Aftermath Project. If you had a publisher, Raymond, you would have needed to tell us, as you know from reading the grant application, because we don't want to because we publish the work on our website. We will be publishing this 5-year cycle of grant work as a book, and we'll be doing an exhibition. So sometimes a publisher will try to restrict what somebody else could publish. And we have to know that going in. And if it's something we can work with, we will. But if it's something we can't, then it's just too big of a conflict, but it's not. We love thinking that Raymond might he'll be in our book, but we love thinking that Raymond will have his own full book of this. And we also, which I don't have to say to you, Raymond, we also really love it when people thank us. Amazing. This is just a good manners note for y'all, because sometimes people do not thank their funders, and that's just like, Oh, okay. With that was $25,000. You know, you could have acknowledged it. And that just happens sometimes. So I'm just saying, for any funder you're involved with, be effusive in your gratitude to them. And Megan, another comment from Megan, you can feel his heart. Totally agree with that, Megan.
Oh, I
Avinash,
didn't also, the other
yeah.
big part of that was that landscape is where my family's from. So that's also another layer to part of my
Oh,
family's from that space.
that's
That's why
right.
I chose it. You can go almost anywhere in the United States and do this story. But
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
like I was in North Carolina for that reason
Oh my
primarily.
God, your heart just leaps off out of those
Mhm.
photos. Avinash, I see, so from Delhi, India, a conflict going on in the northeastern state of Manipur. I'm not going to read all the details of that conflict. Um, so so I would like to know how to write a grant application. Avinash, I'm sorry, we can't tell you how to write a grant application. That's not what this is about. You could certainly read other people's grant proposals. There's a lot online. You could maybe, I know there are photographers in India who have won grants. You might be able to build community. The Aftermath Project does not give a grant to cover a current conflict. Generally speaking, we do have a photographer working in Ukraine won the Aftermath grant because he originally proposed the aftermath of the 2014 revolution, and then Russia invaded Ukraine, and he wanted to continue telling that story, but he was focusing on the aftermath within an ongoing conflict. We also gave a grant to a photographer working in Afghanistan, where there was multiple aftermaths in the wars in Afghanistan, the withdrawal of Soviet troops, the battle of four tribal warlords for control of the capital. There were so many ways, and he was looking at the aftermaths of being in conflict on soldiers. So there are ways to do it, but we don't support projects that are covering conflict. um Anonymous attendee, please do a sequencing workshop. Yeah, I'm thinking I got to do that. I love it. Diana, sequencing is an art, isn't it? It's just like a gorgeous one, and you're seeing it in Raymond's work here. Like, this is just such a beautifully sequenced project. Cindy, I'm interested in the choice to use medium format film, or question mark, maybe it was large format. Is it a reference to history broadly? Good question.
Um, I started off the very first trip I made, I had 4x5, and I used that, but I quickly switched to medium format digital, to do my first capture of things, mostly because I'm in the country in North Carolina. I'm a stranger. Like I
Mm,
want it faster than just like the time it takes to work with a 4x5.
mm.
Some of the images are actually the portraits specifically are are digital capture, and then I make lumen prints from them, which is like taking a negative over top of a piece of photo paper, exposing it to the sun because it kind of you can never really predict what it's going to do, but it makes the images glow. So I wanted the portraits to look that way, and I had another process. So that was sort of my processes for doing it. There's a couple 4x5 images in the project from the very beginning, but mostly it's medium format digital capture.
And yeah, okay, that's such an again, long-term project work just invites different uses of cameras, and yeah, blending of archival materials, but and they each have a reason. I love that. When you work in medium format, there is a way. I love that you referenced that in your question. I would appoint you all to the grant work of Kaylee Spitzer, who won the grant in 2022. And she's a Native American photographer who is using a large format camera to photograph Native Americans in from a Native American's point of view. And it, for us, in looking at that work, when the images first came up, and Kaylee was almost unknown in the photo world. She came to us through a Native American advisor who's worked on the judging with us, but she pulled the rug out from Edward Curtis. She took it, who posed people in certain ways, and it was a way of objectifying Native Americans. You can argue about his motives, and come to whatever conclusions you want, but Kaylee just like took it all back and said, large format, that's mine. representing my people, that's mine, you know, and it just like, it was so powerful and so beautiful. And judges are aware of that, you know, what people are doing with their choice of camera work. We see that and we think about it and we love it, you know. And don't worry if you're not working in medium format or large, it's okay too, you know. Ruben, another question regarding the question of what to send with a proposal. I've always worked on documentary with people front and center. For the project I want to submit, I will photograph only landscapes and use archival images, maps, and text. Well, that's interesting. Oh, you're struggling to figure out how to balance showing your previous work and showing test images. Okay, you're in a tricky space. I'm gonna, Raymond, if you see Ruben's question in the Q&A, he's playing with using images that reflect how the project will look, but haven't been made by him. I would not do that. We are not looking for mood boards. Totally not looking for mood boards. Do not submit anybody else's photograph. You can submit an archival photograph, you know, that you're going to be working with in your work to show an example of that, but you're not going to be taking anybody else's photos. We want to know what you can do as a photographer. Raymond, I'm wondering what you would add to that
Yeah, I
question.
agree completely. I think it's better to you to submit the work you've done, and like instead of like creating a mood board, essentially, Sarah said, because I think that will turn most of the judges off. They'll immediately kind of like, oh, this is not your work, and it's pretty much over for that application.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and I'm just reading comments everywhere. I do want to say, good making a project. Okay, do not put questions in the chat space because that's hard for me to follow there. I'm trying to get to them. If you're a member of the VII community, believe it or not, I am rolling from this Zoom conversation into a conversation for the VII community about how to apply for the American Aftermaths grant. So you can ask even more questions. Folks of you in the general public, we love that you have access to this conversation. But it's a great thing that the VII Foundation does is they have a continuing community. So if you're here in the community and don't know about it, you can, the link is posted on Discord, or you can write to community@7.academy. Now I want to come back to, oh my goodness, how do you organize? I'm gonna just go through a couple. I don't want to miss these. So how do you organize budgeting? We don't ask for a budget, so you don't have to do that. Like we think you're grown up and you're going to know how to spend the money, and we expect you to use some of the money to pay your living expenses. Don't forget, I'm a photographer. I understand what it takes to live as a photographer. So we try to make this as photographer friendly as possible. Bhumika, the text and the captions are on the website, so you can see them there. When you say to thank your funder grant organization, do you mean to also thank the judges they called, or is that too much too weird? If so when I send out the announcement that you've become, you're a finalist or a grant winner, I CC the judges. You are more than welcome to just write and say thank you, I'm so appreciative. And the judges always say they are very open to hearing from the people who were won or were finalists. I know, for example, Photoville, Laura Romanos is often a judge on this grant, and Photoville has offered people shows out of because of the work they've seen here. So it's just, I mean, who doesn't like to be thanked? It's, you don't need to get all weird on them and like, start stalking them or anything, but like a heartfelt thank you, like, oh my God, we all love to know that a photographer's life was made better, because of something we were involved in. So I just got here. Is it standard that we include our salary? Teresa, nope. Yeah, I answered that question for you. Nope, don't put. We expect you to pay part of it. We expect you to do a darn year's worth of work on the project, and you have to report to me at the 6-month point about what you've done and what you're planning to do. But I also know, like Raymond's case, he's a full-time professor. We don't expect him to be running, off to his project, because we also don't have sustained period of time to work on the project. So, yeah. How do you keep going with a personal? I want to get to Diana's. How does your work, Diana? I don't know if I'm going to answer it twice. How does your work juxtapose with Hannah Jones' work on the 1619 project? We Raymond, you can answer. We feel that we're very concurrent, with the 1619 project. We admire it very much. This grant came to be after George Floyd was killed. And I wrote to my board and I said, the 2021 grant has to focus on American aftermaths. It's not a classic post-conflict thing, which we usually fund, but it's time for us to help begin a conversation in our community, in the photo world, and take it further about the aftermaths of enslavement and colonialism. The 1619 project focuses on 1619. We added 1492 because we feel colonialism and enslavement need to be considered together. And our work is highly visual. The written pieces that go with the 1619 project blow me away. And words accomplish things that photos can't, and photos accomplish things that words can't. So, Raymond, how do you think your project fits with the 1619?
That's a big question. I mean, I think it definitely inspired.
Just answer that in 5 words or less.
Like it's inspired by it. I mean, it's part of the theory, the thinking about like what I think about the project and doing this kind of work. So I feel like I've definitely consumed it in, and it's probably showing up in the work in some way, as a lot of other influences are.
Yeah, absolutely. Francesca is asking, do we support winners with admin work that goes into making a project? Thank you for being honest. You have ADHD and would benefit from administrative support from an accessibility standpoint. I would love to say that we do, but Francesca, basically you're looking at the Aftermath project, right here, and I'm a working photographer. This is not my full-time job. I do have, an assistant, Andy Cullen, who's also a full-time photographer, and we were able to pay him a very small salary. So we're just not in the position to be able to do that. I think you could look at arts organizations that do try to support, like have specific programs to support artists with things like that. You could look at, you're not asking for lawyers for the arts, but I think there are a lot of nonprofits that try to figure out ways to help artists maneuver, because a lot of people understand that artists aren't always good at the maths side of thinking, what's his face, the great Harvard education theorist pointed out, Howard Gardner, who pointed out the multiple intelligences we have, and not everybody's got those organizing intelligences. But it's not something, it's a long answer to say it's not something we can support, but I have compassion. And I believe you would be able to find somebody who can work with you in that space. And what is judge's process? Thank you, session. You're welcome. When we conceptualize a story and work on it, some cases during the workflow, by the time if some new ideas come into the flow, should we change the concept or stick to the previous one? I think that Raymond has sort of explained that. He, maybe if you want to add a word or two there, he told you this big process he was working from, and then it continued developing. Your grant here can grow, but you better not be like proposing what Raymond's proposed. And I don't want to see him working in Hawaii, on our grant.
No, I think like for me, I think if I'm understanding the question, like how, you're asking it if the project changed, not how work changed.
If a new idea comes into your workflow,
okay.
Can you change the concept of your project, or do you stick to what it was?
After you got the grant.
I don't know if it's after the grant or not. Maybe you can answer it both ways.
Yeah, but I think I initially, before I got the grant, was only going to do like this one specific, probably more documentary, hardcore approach through my family's direct connection to the landscape. But when I went to the space and you kind of feel how empty and there's a lot of rural spaces, I went out photographing the rain one day, and that's when it clicked for me, like how I needed to look at the landscape. For me, it was a big pivot in the way I was going to approach it. And I think that's maybe what you're asking. So that kind of pivot, influenced by actually stepping onto the land, was important. I think the project after I've got the grant, I'm sort of working. Things change slightly, but not massively. Like I'm not going to all of a sudden I've been in North Carolina only, in the same spaces only, but it's just like how, like what you find out there too. Like I'm still open to changes within the box of my project, and things do change, but it's still the box that I'm in. I haven't switched boxes.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
if you were to make a dramatic turn in concept and you won the grant, you would need to be very much in conversation with me, to make sure that state that you're staying within. We are a mission grantor. Some people give you a grant, like the Guggenheim. You propose what you want to do, and you don't have to try to fit the Guggenheim's mission statement. You just being who you are support is their mission statement and supporting you. But the Aftermath Project, our intentional mission in giving grants is to create a conversation about post-conflict issues. So you can't change, your post-conflict grant to water conservation, like that just doesn't fit what the conversation we're building, and have spent a lot of money and have been privileged to support amazing photographers in building that conversation. I always just say how grateful I am to people who are willing to work and think in these spaces, because they're not always the easiest ones. They're not the ones that get assignments. They're not the ones that necessarily make you famous. There's a commitment in this space that we wanted to make room for and we wanted to support. So I'm just trying to think. There's some other, we've answered that. Taking
Dealing with locals, skeptical, curious locals.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm just going to say, Felicia, yes, this is recorded and will be on the VII interactive VII Insider website. How do you one? We've got, after this. I think this could be our last question. How do you deal with curious and skeptical locals who come out and ask what you're doing with your large cameras in their town?
That's a good question. I mean, it's like I approach everyone openly. Like some people come ask. Sometimes it's just a conversation starter. Like once I was in a cemetery and I had a 4x5 and I was like photographing in the cemetery. And that was a good space, it's a public space for people to come ask questions. Most people are super curious. At the same time, like I am being African American in that space, like I don't go to the person's house with a Confederate flag, right? I don't just like,
and you're not white, it would be a whole different process for me.
Like I mean, there's certain ways of moving through that space. Like I moved away from the 4x5 because I didn't necessarily want to be standing on the side of somebody's farm who I didn't know in a space that loves its guns, right? And so it's just like I kind of operate on that. I mean, I am, maybe just it is me, but I operate with that always at the top of my brain, safety. Like there was one time when I was photographing out at a boat dock and some people were doing duck hunting. And I swear, like boat came in and then they run out and within like 20 feet, they didn't want pointing the gun at me, but they pointed it out towards the water and they shot their shotgun across the water. And I was like, all right, it's time for me to go. I was like, I just don't, you just don't like, yeah. You just have to, like, for me, I'm like super aware of it. Just like that, you never know who you're going to run into. And from my experience in my body, I sort of operate with caution.
I think that's super interesting. And the difference in working with Black communities for you and for me, if I was as a white woman, if I was shooting on that farm, in a part of the world where they love guns, I might be able to get away with it, like by going, by sort of playing total innocent. Oh, I'm just a tourist. I'm so sorry. Which in that space, my skin color, if I'm assuming those, gun owners would probably be white, I can get away there. But there's so many, and as there are other things I can do as a woman that you probably can't do as a man. There's so many ways you learn to use who you are and what you have as you work. And I think Raymond's absolutely clear, crystal clear, right? Especially in a project like this, in a place where there is animosities and continuing, difficulties and guns, that you are safe first, but it's always, you have to have a high level of emotional intelligence to work on a project like this. And I just wanted to go, Anna asked, how do you keep going with a personal project?
Well, this is like soul work too,
with
right?
this one. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the best piece of advice I ever got once as a grad student here, actually, from Chen Chi Chang from Magnum, was like, you have to do the work that only you can do. And I keep that deep to my heart now. It's like I try to do projects that only I really have a perspective on, that I can do, make it mine truly. And this is one of those projects, right? I mean, it started off in a very personal place, and it might expand to a less personal place, but it's a space that, like, I'm curious about this landscape because I know I have some blood in the ground in this space, and I'm just
Mm,
trying to like look at some of those connections. If I
mm.
expand it to other places, I think it would still work in the same way, but I've always been super fascinated by this idea of African Americans in the American landscape, and that has fueled in the last 4 or 5 projects that I've worked on.
Yeah, so I think you're speaking to that idea of somebody else described that to me once, is to do the things you were born to do, not just the things that you can do, and in terms of sticking with a long-term project, and that's the space I've always, worked in, sometimes you take a breath, sometimes you just sit back for a little while and because your mind is always going to be thinking on it. Sometimes you have to stop, and just if the work is hard or if you're not making progress, sometimes trust the idea itself and let it continue to percolate, and it'll bring you back into it. But you do need rest at different times from it. Maybe go work on something else for a little while. You may think of different ways I think one of the things that keeps me going on long-term projects is being grateful for whatever amount of support or good I get. I magnify that maybe somebody donated $1,000 instead of going, what can I do with $1,000? Or, like, oh, that's not enough, to stop and go, that $1,000 represents infinite good. It represents, it's a tiny part of it. And I'm going to be grateful for that. And I find that gratitude carries me in long-term projects and brings me to the people who want to support it, or who belong in that space with me. And it's just my own emotional/spiritual way of working on things, because it takes grit and it takes determination and it takes being in love with the work, which I think is what Raymond, has really just described so beautifully.
There are those times I'm out in the field, like, what am I doing here? Too, at the same time, it's like you always run into those difficult moments where like you don't know why you're in a space, and but you just have to, you kind of push through.
And maybe there's a friend who reminds you. I remember at the beginning of my long-term project that ultimately was my Guggenheim work in Africa, the first trip, I was like, oh my God, I am never going to be able to do this project. It was about forgiveness traditions in post-conflict African countries. And I was like, how can we even make a picture of what forgiveness looks like? What am I doing? And I had a friend who just answered me. He goes, yeah. He goes, you're at the beginning of your project. Those are the questions. That's the fear, that's the uncertainty. That's everything you don't know. And now you're going to go do the work. And it was like, okay, yeah. Oh yeah, that's where I am. That's what it is. So, those are but there's a whole other workshop on how you sustain long term. Francisco Vigo, I just want to give you an answer. My deep desire is, after the end of this 5-year cycle, to begin a rotating process for this grant. If I can maintain the funding, I want to take this to a year in Latin America, a year in Asia, a year in Africa, because as we all know, the aftermaths of colonialism and enslavement are a global issue. So I'm hoping that works. So we'll keep you posted on it for sure. Raymond, I have like a heart full of gratitude to you right now for, getting on this call and speaking, as always, so beautifully and eloquently about your work.
Thank you.
Y'all got, just a really beautiful space to we've never done this type of call before. So I'm glad you were here. And there's lots of thanks over there in the chat box, Raymond. I hope you're seeing them. VII community, definitely Chad, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We VII community, I'll see you in a few minutes if you want to be on that call too, Raymond. In the meantime, I know you've got classes to teach, and
Oh, I
I am
do. Semester's almost
grateful.
over. Yay!
Yeah, yeah,
So,
really proud
awesome.
to be, part of your world this year in particular. So
Thank you
thank
so
you guys.
much.
And we look
I'm
forward to your
grateful for all the
applications.
support.
Yay.
Awesome. All right.
Woo, thank you.
Thank you.